Welcome back to Sarah Straight Up, the podcast where we strip away the surface and talk about real life, business, journeys, and everything in between. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest who I'm fortunate to call a friend as well. He's navigated some of the most complex, high-stakes litigations in the world, involving dynasties, fortunes, art collections, yachts, and so much more, even digital assets. Ian Mann is a partner at Harney's, a leading offshore litigation firm. He's a specialist in ultra-high net worth litigation, succession battles, cross-border insolvencies, and shareholder disputes. He splits his time between Dubai, Dublin, and Hong Kong, and works across the world's wealthiest hubs from Geneva to New York to Singapore. But Ian isn't just a lawyer. Ian's also an entrepreneur, an investor, and a man who's turned his own experiences, his own family experiences, into his career. His experience of dispute has led him to a lifelong mission to help others navigate theirs in the best way possible. Ian, thank you for joining us here today. I'm very excited to be interviewing you.
Sarah, thank you for having me. And with that flattering introduction, I can only disappoint.
It's all true. This is Sarah Straight Up, and it's all true. So let's kick off with, you've spoken publicly, I think, before about how your first taste of dispute resolution is actually personal and involving family. And I want you to just give our viewers an overview. Can you, if you're comfortable, to share that story? And how did something like that form your career path?
Sarah, you get straight into it, and absolutely, it's something that I often tell clients in the early days of working with them, to give them comfort that I'm not simply working on a job. I absolutely know what they feel and what they're going through. And I represented my mother essentially since I was 15 years old, and it was a very difficult situation. I learned about law. I learned really what a trust means in practice, and then I subsequently went to law school and realized that what the professors teach you is pretty irrelevant to what the rights and obligations are, in a trust, and as potential beneficiaries, what you might be entitled to. And that piece of litigation, or series of litigations, lasted about 10 years. And essentially my mother and I lost terribly. I don't want to speak disrespectfully of anyone, but my father left my mother and went off with a much younger woman to Bali in Indonesia, and we were incredibly unsuccessful in asset tracing and obtaining any justice. And what's interesting, I can even see some of the old businesses that he had now still running and taking profits, and that's fine. I've made absolute peace with it because it's a long time ago, but it did show me and teach me the complexities of cross-border work, where assets are not in the jurisdiction where you think you have a claim. For example, in divorce, that asset tracing is very much about having human intelligence and having people who know what they're doing. But stripping it all back to really how you frame the question, it's made me very passionate about what I do, and particularly for the family stuff. I really, really want to win. I really, really believe in the justice of cases. I really, really dislike those people who think that they can just ignore the law and use their deeper pockets in litigation to crush others and not pay their fair share. It's horrendous what can happen in litigation, actually.
Thank you, Ian, for sharing that, because it's not easy. It's personal. And I think you've hit a couple of nails on the head. Firstly, the difference between kind of textbook and academic law and the practicality, and something we're always talking about, even to students, saying, it's a great law school and you learn theory, but it's applied totally different. The skill set to be a lawyer is totally different. And secondly, the fact that you're so vested and you have walked the walk, you've been that person, you've been that litigant.
Yeah.
It must give you a whole different perspective in practice, because when you've mixed and you've been the other side, you've been the victim, and when you're defending, you must do it differently.
Absolutely. And I think the first thing is it just gives you an ability to connect with clients. And coming back to those law school students, I'm always telling our young associates and anyone who comes to visit us that don't be overly transactional with your clients. You know, if it doesn't matter to you and all you want is the engagement letter signed and the fees out of it, you should be doing something else. Do something you're passionate about, and clients can see right through it. Clients can see, as I think you and I have discussed over lunch a few times, clients know when you're just dialing it in and you don't actually passionately want to help them. It stops you from being creative. It stops you from looking at other solutions. But also that human empathy builds human connection, and that's really important.
And that is what will survive the AI age. And when we talk about lawyers and AI, and of course we have to embrace the tech which is happening, but lawyers who have relationships, lawyers who are able to gain the trust, AI can't do that. AI might be able to do strategy, AI might be able to do, document law, etc. But it can't have that level of relationship, and those relationships are super important, especially turning to the kind of work you do because there's so much at stake. Now, Ian, without kind of beating around the bush, the kind of work you do, most lawyers would dream of doing, right? In their careers. No, they would, right? You deal with some very, very high level work, right? Whether it's things like funds, yachts, family businesses, sometimes whole entire legacies are on the line.
Yeah.
Can you share with our viewers what you think about? Is there a difference in how the ultra wealthy fight?
Absolutely. And it's taken me a long time to understand that, because in the early days, I was just working for, the subsidiary company of a billionaire family, and I didn't really understand fully how that company was connected with an ultra high net worth family. I was dealing with directors that weren't family members, and as I've progressed, as I've built the trust, with those family members, and they've seen me in action, I've gotten closer to families, and I've been, I feel like extremely grateful for the work that I've been able to do, and I genuinely love every day of the job. There isn't a day that I resent or don't feel eternally grateful for the work that I get to do. Ultra high net worth individuals are in some ways extremely unfortunate, because very often they are either born into or evolve into a situation where everyone is trying to squeeze something out of them. And it's often been said to me by families that I've worked with for many years. They said, gosh, we worked with you for 10 years and lawyers have come and go, but for you, you've always charged us fairly. You've never asked us to invest in some crazy project that you're doing. You've never asked us to support something. You've never tried to squeeze us because of who we are. And that's really important to build that trust. And equally, a lot of my high net worth families, they'll come to me and say, oh, Ian, we know you don't do English law. We know you don't practice the English courts, but can you approach the lawyers there and get the fee quote first? Because with our family name, we're terrified that they will, give us a huge quote. Now, that's not a right, of course, because English lawyers are ethical and don't generally do that. But that's the sort of paranoia that ultra high net worths live in. And every transaction that they're entering into, they're wondering if they're being ripped off.
I think that's really interesting, because they talk about the tax on the ultra high nets, and every time there is a fee quote, it's like, okay, so what's the real fee quote and what's the surplus? What's the tax because of the name? And I think it gets to a point where when you develop the level of trust that you have with the ultra high nets, not only do they want you to approach the English lawyers because you'll get the best quote, but because they trust you, and they trust you're not going to be doing anything that's unethical or otherwise, and you've got their interest. And it takes a lot to get that from people, because they're surrounded by snakes and sharks, often within their own families. And there's a saying, more money, more problems, right?
Exactly.
And even from a client base I've dealt with, I've seen that. So it's really interesting that you're able to kind of see the nuances that are needed to deal with such individuals. It's not just about kind of billing them, but it's a whole different ballgame.
And, they're living in such a world of distrust and insecurity. And to your point that, sometimes it's their own family members that they're afraid of. And, I have clients who are, middle-aged, but they are terrified that they are not going to get as much as, say, one of their siblings in the will. They're terrified that actually they've been cut out from all sorts of businesses and conversations. And interestingly, for those people, I can see them over time. The stress and the toll it takes on them is really life-changing. It changes the way they behave in their businesses, with their relatives, and it can be very difficult. So I'm always advising those families. I mean, I'm a disputes lawyer at heart. I'm not a lawyer who's extremely good at sitting down for mediation and having the family governance conferences that I know some trust lawyers who are really specialized in that are doing. And I'm always very frank with my clients. Come to me at the sharp end when we've got a dispute, when we're asset tracing, when we're fighting over inheritance. But there's a definite skill for those lawyers who can try to have those tough conversations so that family members don't feel insecure in their positions in the family. And for a family like mine, it was, I often joke with my high net worth clients. I say to them, well, we don't have as much money as you, so we don't have as many problems.
Of course, no. I think that's absolutely true in my experience. Yeah. And at that level, when you're dealing with kind of high net worths of that level, it's not even about money. Often I've dealt with matters where there's so much pride, or there's misplaced ego, or there's genuine concerns about legacy, and they fight tooth and nail. Sometimes that takes over the commercial sense, or the even legal sense of fighting something. It becomes very, very personal, right?
It really does. And I think the sibling rivalry is the worst of all. I'm a commercial litigation lawyer, so everything we do is usually within family corporations, businesses. But I always joke, actually, that it's commercial law that is the clothing for what is in truth an emotional family battle. And the sibling rivalries are the worst, and it goes back to some slight or some interference, sometimes back in their teenage years, that they just can't live with, and it's never been resolved. And Sarah, as you and I have discussed, I'm half British, half English, and half Indonesian. So my Asian side of me, I think gives me a different sense of what families are. Families in Asian countries are often much closer, larger. We're just a closer family unit. We're not. I think we're still programmed differently. And I think what's happened in the last few years in ultra high net worth sort of litigation is that those high net worths are looking for lawyers who are a little bit more personal, that are more family orientated themselves, that will have a relationship with them and won't be quite so Western about it.
Absolutely. And I think, the heart of a lot of these families, especially even in the Middle East and the Far East, the culture of the family is huge. And the hierarchy and the listening to the elders, it goes back to the majlis systems. The elder gives a decision and everybody goes by. You don't dare to say no. And sometimes the kind of concepts that are quite alien to them about, fairness in a certain way, they're not interested. And even dealing with high net worths in this jurisdiction, we're often, you have to tell, sometimes even London Council know, their client's never going to come to court. They're never going to get cross-examined. This is their statement. I understand everything about, the weight of evidence, but that's just how it is. And that's the lawyers who understand the intricacies of such families. And there's not many. They're quite difficult to deal with if you don't know your way around. And I think also the trust element, they need to see what kind of a lawyer you are, and you're not just that transactional, I want your money, because you become their confidant as well as their lawyer.
You really do. And oddly enough, just today, I was speaking to a Silk and explaining that one of these clients, would not be signing an affidavit, certainly would never be appearing in court, because actually the dispute is over a lot of money, but not enough money to for them to risk exposing their reputation. Or I've had clients say to me, well, it's utterly demeaning. I'm not having some lawyer cross-examine me in a minute's worth, which makes it difficult, because obviously the trial process in common law systems requires witnesses to attend, so it can be very difficult and you have to choose who will be your witnesses, and you have to really take the family through a journey. But fundamentally, it's really important in this sort of work to try try and settle, because the family does not want the reputational risk of litigation, does not want to be in the public eye, or to move it away from litigation into arbitration or, some kind of private dispute
Absolutely,
resolution.
and it preserves a relationship. I'm always a massive fan of saying, I don't want to see families in litigation. Like, when you are blood related, sort that out behind closed doors. Whatever your ADR is, just sort that out. And I think moves are being made definitely within this jurisdiction to try, because obviously there's huge family businesses here, to try and ensure that does happen, rather than, years and years of litigation where only you and I benefit as the lawyers.
Exactly.
And
It's
we're
terrible.
not that kind of lawyer. If we can sort it, we do.
Yeah.
Now, everything you've talked about, and it's complex, let's throw in the fact that you then do cross-border, you're dealing with different laws.
Yeah.
And multiple egos. So
Yeah.
how does that all kind of gel in?
Well, that is absolutely the most, forensically, legally interesting part of the job. And over the years, we have this sort of expression at Harney's, and I'm sure many other people do, we really like that trusted advisor role. So the client will come to us and say, we're LPs in a Cayman Islands fund, or we have a BVI company that owns our property in Knightsbridge in London. But then we realize, actually, they have problems because they have assets all around the world. And if there are assets or investments all around the world, it necessarily means that there are going to be different courts involved, because what governs cross-border is the governing law of any document, contractual arrangement or investment, then the venue specified for the resolution of the dispute, and then very often, just using brute force and ignorance when you're applying law, the location of the
Absolutely,
assets.
yes.
And so all of those cross-border elements comes in. Now, there's the complexity that courts don't necessarily recognize each other's judgments. There's some geopolitics in there as well, let's be real. And also, but the wonderful thing is working, with lawyers like you and me. We're working in different jurisdictions, but we can work together as a team and cooperate. And then, you have to work with lawyers that are excellent and that you can trust, and you yourself have a relationship with.
It's your reputation's on the line.
Absolutely. And, if I've made or if you've made the recommendation about me, then if I do a bad job, that reflects
on you,
very
absolutely.
poorly on you, I'm actually coming back to something you said earlier about when, different cultures are prepared to litigate. One absolutely classic issue we have in China is that, when it's often a patriarch, when the patriarch of the business is around, the children of the second and third generation are often lining up to say, well, I deserve that asset or that business, or I've been unfairly treated, I should sue. But they won't do it whilst the patriarch is alive.
Absolutely.
And then on the terrible, sad passing of the patriarch, I'm just amazed within a few weeks of the
You're lucky if it's weeks. Sometimes it's just literally hours or days.
So that's for you in this jurisdiction too, is it? It's absolutely incredible. But the Asian sort of sense of honor, in not disturbing the patriarch while he's still alive, it's very strict, and there's no.
Whether it's the honour or it's the fear, it's both.
Well, absolutely right. Very good point. Yeah. Very good point.
It could be both. Ian, I'm going to move to your entrepreneurial side, which
go on.
I love, right? Being a fellow entrepreneur and disruptive. And we're old school, so we're not the kind of millennials and we're not the Gen Z, but we kind of understand. So you're not just a lawyer, you're an entrepreneur and investor. And how does that side of your work facet help you, or help the legal side of what you do?
Well, first of all, I should say, going back to my mother, I've supported her financially since I was 22 years old. Dad took everything, and that's been very, very rewarding for me, and my mother and I have a wonderful relationship. But I started life at the English bar. I was a barrister in London for 8 years, and in order to build a practice, you've got to think of ways that you can promote yourself, whether it's giving talks, doing CPD points, meeting solicitors, and that gave me the start of my sort of entrepreneurial thinking as to how you build a practice. And then I joined Harney's in the British Virgin Islands, And Harney's taught me so much. I mean, changed the way that I, approach legal problems, but also I got plugged into this network of this is how we market globally to our clients. And then I became an equity partner at Harney's, and you're a business owner then of a multinational firm, and then you start to really understand what it means to be a business owner. And over the years, I've co-invested sometimes. That's often a friends and family club investing it can be interesting. And so I love investing. I love supporting young people. I love particularly investing in youth football clubs, associations, anything that gets young people away from their screens and onto sports pitches. So I've been supporting that in Hong Kong and in various Asian countries, and I would love to do the same here. And very much I enjoy listening to the pitches as well, and trying to understand the business that I'm investing in. Part of that, I mean, you're a very successful entrepreneur, and you'll know this. One of the biggest issues with lawyers is that they're not numerate enough, and you cannot be an entrepreneur. You can't look at investments. You can't assess the value of the business unless you're numerate. I'm always trying to persuade lawyers, love numbers. Don't be afraid of numbers. That's what will really free you and enable you to become an entrepreneur. I
think it's more than numbers. You're absolutely right on the numbers kind of front for lawyers, but also let's face it, traditionally we're from the same profession, we're barristers. We are the pinnacle of knowledge, and everybody comes to us when they're really struggling. And we wear a dark suit and we speak in Latin, and then we lock ourselves in a cupboard and we don't have a life. That's the typical old school how people view the bar. Very, very respectful profession, but very kind of moved away from the public. Nowadays, what do you say about the importance of both business development and that entrepreneurial skill? Even in a profession such as the bar, can we afford just to be what the public think we are, just sitting behind old desks waiting for pretty briefs and pink ribbons?
Absolutely not, Sarah. And it's really important that lawyers understand that they are officers of the court, and there are professional boundaries and obligations that we have to fulfill. But the complaint that I get from clients all the time, so we manage lawyers around the world on behalf of clients, and the criticism, the feedback that we get is that these lawyers are simply not commercial. Time after time, people have come to me and they say, we got this opinion from some lawyer in some country, and they show it to me, and it's a 20-page opinion, too much Latin, lots of case law analysis, prepared for lay people. And the answer at the end is essentially maybe yes and maybe no. I mean, it's a disgrace. You need to give your view, and of course you have to do a risk assessment, and you have to identify issues. But at the end of the day, you're being paid money, you're insured to practice, and you have to give a view as to what you think is the best answer. And it drives clients crazy, to have this very academic approach to law that doesn't progress their business in any way.
And they're not impressed, and that's what I say, even as the juniors I train. And if we are doing a legal opinion, I said summarize at the top, because a lot of your GCs are not going to read it. They just want to know the bottom line. They're going to read your bullet points of this is my advice, bang, 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 bang. And then you get into the reasoning. I said it so, and it's very, very important that lawyers do that. And the whole Latin and trying to impress people with jargon, there's something to be said about, and I think it was Gary who once said to me, Gary Bond, keep it simple, stupid.
Absolutely, I like it.
Keep it simple, stupid. The best lawyers are those who can get the most complex point and make it really simple.
Yeah.
So the client can understand it and everybody can understand it. So I think that it's happening. There is a mind kind of set shift away, but we still have the old school lawyers who are operating a certain way.
And there's a level of insecurity, I think for the young lawyers that they want to make it look as sort of legal as possible when they're in their early years. They're not quite sure what they should be answering, and really the clients just want something simple. And I often say this to my associates, actually it's the first few lines of an email or an advice that sets the tone.
Absolutely.
If you've got a complex opinion, you start with saying, essentially, the answer is we can do it, and here are the reasons why. That just say that at the beginning. Don't make them read to the end.
Summarise, absolutely. Now, moving to litigation. we know, and as lawyers and what the public see, obviously I wish it was as kind of, interesting as LA Law or Suits or Ally McBeal. It's nothing like that. Sometimes I wish it was. But anyway, it's about documents, it's about procedures, it's about deadlines, it's about arguments, it's about case law, it's about lawyers being clever on their feet. It's about lots and lots of work that goes on behind the scenes. But actually, the kind of work we do in dealing with yourself, dealing with the ultra high nets and high nets, it's about real people, it's about families, and it's about relationships. Tell us about the human nature of the work that you undertake. What's it taught you, especially when so much money or legacies is involved?
I think it's taught me that some of the most powerful people in the world are actually not nearly as able and professional as you might think, and because they some of them, not all of them, of course, have arrived there sort of by accident of birth, and they feel as if they should know it all because they're these rich, powerful people, and then they have to be very vulnerable with you in an entirely confidential setting, of course, to tell you their greatest fears and apprehensions, and then you have to provide a solution. So, for a lot of the time, you are giving them the assurance that you've done it all before, that you can, and if you haven't, you can come up with a creative solution. But that, you made a point earlier about AI, and absolutely AI can be used for discovery, disclosure, standard opinions, all sorts of work can be done. But I think in a sense for the high net worths, they're almost going back a step and saying, it's all become too technological and corporate. We actually want more bespoke care, almost going back to the sort of, people often say to me, well, we don't bank at a retail level or even at a private bank with some of the big banks. We go to tiny banks in Europe because we want to be looked after, and that's the same with their lawyers. Now, that's a niche area of the market. It takes a long time to get there, but if you can get there, it's extremely satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how I set up. I wanted a niche boutique law firm, not big law. It's interesting what you say, because I think in that dynamic, when they open up to you, they kind of take it as read that you know the law. They want to have the trust in you, and that's an interpersonal skill. You make them feel comfortable. Yeah. You make them open up to you because you're speaking their language. You're looking at them in the eye. You're not just there, looking at your clock saying, how much can I bill? Yeah. And that's, I think, the most important point in these kind of relationships. And tell our viewers, do you find yourself in those situations? You're more than just a lawyer at that stage. You're playing so many different roles. Litigation's one of the most reluctant spends. They're at the end when they come to you, right? They really are. It's not like things are going to get sorted. It's a reluctant spend. It's the last port of call. What kind of role are you playing aside from I can do the law? Because let's face it, there's lawyers who can do the law, but you wouldn't put them in front of that client because the client would run away. This person has no understanding.
I think you just have to have, really, really good EQ. You have to really understand the commercial drivers and some of the emotions. Now, I don't put myself up as high as some of those really amazing divorce lawyers, and we work with divorce lawyers, and they are absolutely incredible because they often come to us and say, we'll do the divorce, you help us with the asset tracing around the world, and we love working with them. They have amazing EQ and patience. I wouldn't put myself up at that level, but I think most importantly for me, you have to be willing and you have to enjoy socializing with your ultra high net worths. I mean, I go to weddings every year with my clients, and sometimes I barely know the children who are getting married because it's simply because their parents want to show that they have their lawyer at one of the tables. Yes. It's absolutely fine, and equally, my wife always laughs because it's not uncommon for our clients to sort of turn up semi-unannounced with sort of 20 minutes notice to our apartment and say, oh, yes, we'd like to speak to you. And again, absolutely fine. I mean, for me, and people often complain that, oh, gosh, they disturb me on holiday or this. I don't find it disturbance at all. I actually pick up the phone and say, what's going on? 5 minutes with them, they're all calm. And
that's why you do what you do and the others won't, because they watch the clock, this is my time. Yeah. That doesn't work in this world, in working in that niche. And there's no criticism of those who don't want to do that, but this area is not for them. Yeah. And I think the clients are very astute to that, right? Because they do expect a certain level of service, which you clearly provide. we are paid, sometimes quite handsomely, to take on the worries of the world, to take the weight off our clients' shoulders, and it can have a toll on us. How do you decompress and how do you kind of step away? Because sometimes even after a hard week in court or, you know, a long litigation, it's quite draining. You live on adrenaline. What's your kind of get out?
I love fitness of all kinds, you know, whether it's trail running in Hong Kong. Hong Kong's a hilly place. Not many people realize that. So I do a lot of that. I've just in the last 2 years started doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu with a professional fighter of 10 years from Wales has moved to Hong Kong, and he beats me up twice a week, so that keeps me humble. And you know, but you do need something. And you know, fitness is very important, I think, to clear the mind. But for me, most importantly, is my little girl, and just sassy. Just hanging out with her is the greatest thing. And there have been moments when, you know, we've had really, really tough moments as a firm. And you know, I remember when she was a baby, I came back at 3 a.m, and you never pick up a sleeping baby, as you know. But I did actually pick her up and just to smell her and have a cuddle with her when she was sort of 3 months old. Gosh, it soothes you because soul, it grounds you. It makes you realize what's important. You've got to keep perspective, you know.
Absolutely, and I think that's so important. And what you say, I agree with 100%. And especially the fitness, it's an outlet for stress, and the endorphins. You just feel good after the hour. You feel awful through the hour, the 3 minutes after, and then you feel great. Yeah. And I often say, if I don't train the way I train, I don't know what I'd be like. You know, I'd be all over the place, and it's so important to be able to do that.
I think also, though, and a colleague of mine is extremely good at it, you've got to have a bit of a sense of humour. And sometimes when you've got to be careful, but sometimes when I joke with my clients about just how ludicrous the litigation is, they laugh too, and because we all need to laugh. And then,
but you keep it real. They like
you
that.
really do. You know? So it's worth laughing at yourself and, you know, laughing at the situation, because
absolutely, and again, that's real. You're not trying to sit there, you know, impressing them. You're like, come on, you know, are we really going to run that? But you know, you can have a joke about it, and I love that. Yeah. Now, you split your time between Dubai, Dublin, and Hong Kong. As we are in Dubai, I want to big up Dubai. I want to know, what does Dubai offer you that the other jurisdictions don't?
You know, I have just been blown. So I've been coming to Dubai for the last 2 years and essentially doing 1 to 2 weeks per month. I am blown away by the entrepreneurial spirit in this town, the sort of swagger in people's step. It's a very, very open and free economy, and people from around the world are coming here. The other great thing about it is just this peaceful melting pot of cultures, you know, and I'm constantly, and I think people don't mind, but I'm constantly inquiring, you know, where are you from? It's just so absolutely fascinating. And there's a real can-do attitude here. And I think, you know, there are, you know, the world's a very sort of unstable place at the moment, but there are places where I think people just have lost faith in their government to deliver, whereas here I think people have amazing faith in the leadership here, and they really feel enthusiastic about the future, and that energy is infectious.
It's contagious, absolutely.
So no problem with having a shout out for Dubai. I genuinely feel it. I love being here. And
it's so true. The leadership says we give you wings. It's the land of opportunities. The point you make about the kind of melting pot, we are 10% indigenous and 90% expat. Raising a family here means, you know, the children have access to friends from all over the world. They respect different cultures, religions, languages. They get to know. It's so nice to raise children in a community like that as well.
And listen, for all of those reasons, that's why, you know, Harney's has asked me to open their office here in the DIFC.
Fabulous.
And it's, you know, we should have done it years ago.
Wait for you to be here.
It would be wonderful to spend more time with you, Sarah, and work together. But the community here has been so incredibly warm and welcoming, and we come with the deepest of respect. We're new. I am delivering a 65-year-old brand of Harney's to Dubai, but I don't know anything about this place. I'm really learning, and I just want to respectfully plug into the ecosystem, you know.
I'm sure you're going to be absolutely fine and navigate that system really, really well.
Thank
you.
On
that note, where do you see the future of ultra high net worth or high net worth disputes in an age of kind of digitalization, tokens, crypto, etc.? Is there going to be a lot more of that kind of dispute, or are we still going to have traditional disputes with ultra net worth?
Yeah, well, I think it just comes back to the flow of capital. So we often say at Harney's that we basically open offices because we're following capital. And I suppose, the UAE was no exception. And in terms of asset classes, high net worths are absolutely interested in digital currency, crypto. They are, they're getting involved in every form of alternative asset class so they don't miss out. And so the skill set has to change, because you have to know how to, to do litigation within those asset classes, but fundamentally with asset tracing, obviously digital, currencies are really, really hard to do, and there's a complexity to it, and we're all catching up with the technology, including the courts. So yeah, I love the art disputes, I love the inheritance disputes. They're intellectually, very satisfying, but equally, you and I are going to have to continue to upskill in those different asset classes as they develop.
Now we turn to a segment where we call it the straight up, the rapid fire. So some straight up answers, Ian.
Okay.
What do you wish you knew in your 20s?
Just be more patient. There is no rush, success or whatever will come. Job satisfaction certainly will come. Don't be so, eager, and just relax. Enjoy life more.
The biggest myth about success?
That you can ever achieve it. I don't know. you just got to keep going. It doesn't matter what you have.
It doesn't happen overnight.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, we are in such a materialistic world, and to me, success is not, how much money I have or what car. I don't value any of that. I actually just value my family, and I value the work that I do, and I value the human interactions, having a good laugh here and there.
And making an impact.
Making an impact, absolutely, yeah.
Who do you look up to and why?
Oh gosh, very difficult question. I have two mentors in life. I'm sure they won't want to be named, but they are two seasoned lawyers in their late 60s, 70s, and they've really, really guided me and helped me in life. My parting with my father was, age 15, essentially, and so they have filled voids and helped both me and my wife, and very much part of our family. And so, I'd always recommend to people, have mentors. They're fundamentally important.
What's a quote that you stand by or you find yourself always saying?
Oh, that's very hard. Some of my associates have so many quotes. I'm always lecturing them about something. I often say the work will come. And what I mean by that is, don't be too pushy. Be yourself, present what you have, and the work always comes. I'm never worried about, will we have a new piece of work? It always comes.
What's the worst piece of advice that you've ever received in your career?
Gosh, this is a really tough section.
Hey, Sarah, straight up.
You really are. I think the worst piece of advice actually was when I decided that I wanted to leave England and move to the British Virgin Islands, the BVI. I was told, don't do that. If you leave London, the alleged heart of the legal world, you'll never get back into your real career. And actually, London's an amazing, mighty legal and financial centre, but going to the BVI was an incredibly good step and opened my mind to the world. So that was terrible advice to tell me not to move.
Absolutely. I think there is this misconception of what the legal landscape is like outside of London. Yes, London is prestigious, and it's, the centre of the bar. And, they're actually quite rude. I've heard synonyms like, what's Hong Kong? Filth. Failed in London, tried Hong Kong.
Absolutely.
We're desert lawyers in Dubai. It's like, no.
I assume I'll be described in both ways now.
The filth desert lawyer, no. Describe yourself in 3 words.
Relaxed, energetic, and a daddy to my daughter.
Fabulous. And any particular personal or professional setback that you've really learnt the most from?
Yeah, I've certainly made some mistakes in my career. I've had some clients who I thought were, long-term loyal clients, and turns out they weren't, and that can be hurtful. And sometimes you sort of give everything, assuming your client is with you, and with people too. But I think it's a mistake not to continue to trust and to believe in people.
You judge by your own standards.
Yeah.
And sometimes you've been burnt.
Absolutely. But, I do believe in the fundamental decency of people. And I think with all the conflicts that go around the world, people are people.
I think the fact that you continue to be yourself is why you are who you are, because even if you do get burnt or, you do get hurt in the process, you continue with your energy and your vibe, and you'll attract the right kind of people around you, clients or otherwise. I'm a strong believer in that. They don't stoop to their level, right?
Yeah.
You've worked with some of the world's largest families, advised across borders, and you have a career that's at the top in the game of offshore litigation. But I'm going to talk to you about legacy, and we've already talked about SASE and what's important to you, and at the root of everything you do is family. It's about being, having peace of mind. Success is not money and cars and houses, right? When you think about your legacy and you think about how you will want to be remembered and what you leave behind for SASE, beyond the deals and beyond everything, how do you envisage that? What do you think?
It is actually very important to me that Saskia feels at ease in the world, because I see it with so many colleagues and opponents in litigation. They're fundamentally insecure about themselves. They don't believe that they have, a right to be where they are, and they have this awful imposter syndrome, And I think it's really, really important that we raise our children to be, appropriately confident, but not to continue to worry about what other people are thinking about you. Little Sassy 7, and since she could speak, we've always told her, don't worry about what other people think of you. If you worried about that all your life, you'd go mad. And I think that's really, really important to sort of just spread that message of be yourself and don't worry about other people.
I love that. And finally, for our viewers who are listening, they might be in the midst of conflict. They might be having a family dispute. They might be having a relationship, a business dispute, and they're in the thick of it and they don't know what to do. What's your kind of straight up advice of aligning their mindset in such circumstances?
Very simple. There is always a solution. What you think is a quagmire and you can't get around it, speak to someone who's done it many times before. There is always a solution. Maybe some creativity is involved, maybe some personalities involved. So, for example, I'm dealing with a very difficult dispute within a private equity fund at the moment, two enormously wealthy gentlemen, and the law is against both of them in coming to some, litigation resolution. But I've really inserted myself in between them to try and get them to settle. And, a lot of lawyers don't want to do that. For me, it's not about writing letters and correspondence. It's about actually trying to meet them and get them together and mediate and also build a good relationship with opposing counsel to try and find a solution. So there's always a solution there.
I think that's great advice, because we're trained and taught, even as lawyers, lawyers are not those who know the best law. It's about those who can provide the solution. And those who fixate on the problem don't move on to ever get anywhere.
Yeah.
So fantastic advice from Ian. We're very much looking forward to welcoming you to Dubai. I cannot wait. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That's Ian Mann from Ahani Solicitors, soon to be in the DIFC as well. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to Sarah Straight Up.
Thank you ever so much for having me.